All right, you've made it to day 2 in Structure's little 7-day nutrition course. So yesterday we kind of went over macronutrients, and potentially the most demonized macronutrient, as mentioned yesterday, was the evil carbohydrates. Now, whether or not you believe in that, this is to go over 5 things regarding carbohydrates. Why, how much, when, what, and who. Let me break down each one of those so we can digest each one. So, why carbohydrates? Why do you, as a human being, need carbohydrates? Quite simply, when you intake carbs, your body has systems in place that we've evolved to break down carbohydrates much more quickly than any other macronutrient. So, carbohydrates as a usable fuel source, as a stored fuel source, it's just about the easiest that we have. So as an available fuel source, carbohydrates, they win. What about how much? When it comes to how much, there's a lot of factors that can come into play. Of the most important, your daily activity level. If you are seated and you drive to and from work and you park in the closest parking spot to work, then your daily activity level is probably on the lower side. However, if you walk to and from work, or if you bike to and from work, or if you have a long walking commute, or if you have a active job, such as a kindergarten teacher or an elementary school teacher, of which you're in various positions and guiding children throughout the hallways, or if you're a construction worker, you probably have a very different activity level than the person who drives right to work and then right back without really walking too much from the car. So that daily activity level is going to be a big factor in your daily carb consumption. What about your workout routine? If you are doing cardio, for instance, most people think they need a lot of carbohydrates to replace those used carbs or used fuel, but in fact, it's probably the opposite. The workouts that require the most fuel, the most carbohydrates, are actually weight training. So strength training / resistance training, even body weight training, depletes your glycogen stores, which is known as stored carbohydrates, a lot more than cardio. Now, different cardio types may deplete it more via the heart rate, etc., and the different energy systems. Separate topic, potentially for another 7-day course on exercise physiology. But more importantly, the workout routine really does matter. One of the mistakes that we see people make, actually, with carbohydrate consumption within workout routines is this: thinking that the calories burned during exercise can be replaced afterwards via carbs, fat, protein, etc. Meaning, I just burned 500 calories in my workout, says my Fitbit or whatever watch, or iWatch, Apple Watch, and now I'm going to go have that 500 calories going because it's not even. The problem with that is that A, the calorie trackers are not necessarily correct, and B, that's not how it works from an energy in and energy out standpoint. Especially from a cardiovascular standpoint, we do want to watch specifically what type of cardio you're doing to analyze how much carbs you need. As far as body composition, somebody with a larger percentage body fat, they're not necessarily going to need as many carbs as somebody with a lower percentage body fat. Why that may seem counterintuitive is basically because the percentage of muscle. More muscle requires more carbohydrates for daily movement. So daily or for workouts. So the higher the muscle in body A, person A, they're going to require much more from a daily energy standpoint than the person with less muscle, quite simply. So body composition and body fat percentage will determine how many carbs you need. The 2 other, I think they're kind of straightforward, or 3 others: height, weight, and age, right? How tall you are, you might need a little bit more carbs. Your current weight, you might need a little bit less, a little bit more. How old you are. And then the last thing that determines, I think, potentially the most determining factor of how much carbs should you eat is your goal, right? So by the way, if you don't have one, no problem. We can either come up with one or work with you on it, or to support you in your training needs. But if you are trying to reap a reward from training, then by all means, having an awareness of how many carbohydrates you need, in addition to how many calories, but having an awareness of how many calories you need is super important. So a couple things with that. Number one, there's ways of doing what's called calorie cycling. Number two, there's ways of doing what's called carb cycling. And number three, you can just eat the same stuff, same number every day. But again, that depends on the goal. So that's the brief. That wasn't brief, but that's the how much, okay? Now, as far as when should you eat carbohydrates, I would say this is highly individualized. Some people do not like eating before workouts if they work out first thing in the morning. So I would recommend finding the timing that works for you as far as carbohydrates. Throughout your 2 to 4 to 6 meals, my recommendation would always be to surround carbohydrates with another macronutrient known as protein. The problem with eating carbohydrates without the macronutrient protein is that the blood sugar goes like this and then crashes immediately following. What happens when you eat protein and carbs together is you get this steady rise and then steady fall. So the timing of carbohydrates, while it doesn't matter if you eat them necessarily mostly first thing in the morning, lunch, and dinner, what matters most is that you consume it with protein. What are the different types of carbohydrates? Quite simply, and again, our nutritionist Jordan wanted me to really break down some of the finer points here. Basically, there's simple, okay? All that means is that they take a lot less digestion to break down and to turn into energy. Times that this is super important and super appropriate pre or post workout because you're gonna need that fuel like right now. Now, on the flip side, they don't necessarily have that many nutrients within it. So these are sources like Sour Patch Kids and other sugars, etc. On the flip side, though, of the simple carbohydrate conundrum is complex carbs. So quite simply, whole grains and all sources of whole grains are yams, potatoes, and oatmeal and rice. All of that within the confines of complex carbohydrates. It takes a lot longer for those to break down, and there's a lot more nutrients within each of them. So those are things to keep in mind. Now, who should eat more or less carbs? The following people need to eat a lot more carbs. People who are weight training 5 to 6 times a week, they definitely need to eat more carbohydrates. People who have a very high activity level on a daily basis, these people probably need at least 50 grams more than the average person on a daily basis, depending upon their anthropometrics, meaning how tall and their weight. And then the other thing is who should adjust their carbohydrates. People who should adjust their carbohydrates, people actively participating in a fitness endeavor. So like if you're chasing down a marathon, if you're doing a bodybuilding competition, if you're doing your own competition for work, and you have there's a lot of people that do pools to see who can lose the most body fat, things like that. But those people, they should manipulate carbohydrates. Who should be considering their carbohydrate consumption on a daily basis? Big question. Everybody. And I say this with certainty that I have not met somebody when they take a food diary and a food tracker. I have yet to meet somebody who hands me a food diary of which they are eating too few carbs for their current goal, meaning that they're trying to achieve X, meanwhile they are not adding up the other variables that equals X, and that includes carbohydrate consumption. So I think that's a key point to understand is carbohydrate consumption is super important. It's a super important topic, but it's definitely not one size fits all. There's definitely not this very low carb. Just so we're clear, very low carb is defined as under 50 grams. If you're under 50 grams of carbohydrates on a daily basis, that's very low carb. If you're under 100, that's the definition. If you're under 100 grams on a daily basis, that's called low carb. So just by definition, carbohydrates, a necessary fuel, everybody needs them. The questions that remain: when do you eat them? How much do you have? And what sources do you use? I hope we didn't answer any of those questions because that would defeat the purpose of this inquisitive yet daily reminder for you to look internally to see maybe we can help along this journey towards learning more about nutrition. So in order to find out more, there's lots of ways you can calculate it. We have an in-body scale of which you can step on it, it calculates your metabolism. We can find out and break down that. There's also, you could go on the interwebs and just Google it. But that's it for carbs. I know that's a big one. It's not talked about enough, but carbs are a super important fuel source. So stay tuned for day 3. Can't wait to talk about it. Protein, also known as protein. Have a good day.